some Holy Ghost. Some Holy Ghost, fill our hearts with faith, and sing them the fire. Send forth thy spirit, and it should be created, and our children be created. Let us pray. O God, that you touch the hearts with faith, and the light of the Holy Ghost. Grant us by the same Spirit to see wise and to be good and comfort. To the same Christ our Lord. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed art thou amongst women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Saint Joseph, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Pius X,
So I needed to tell you just the conclusion of this topic of the angels and demons, and then we'll go back to our topic of the total consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So the word deliverance has become quite popular in the last few years. You might hear someone say, would you please come and pray over my son? Or can you please pray the deliverance prayers? So we're getting the idea that someone, either the priest or sometimes laymen, have power to remove the devil from souls. But that's not true. Only priests whose hands are consecrated, priests whose fingers are consecrated, can remove the devil from souls. So this whole movement of the charismatics to say deliverance prayers is phony. That means fake, pretentious, pretense. I don't know what other words you need. False. So deliverance prayers that a priest says could last for many hours, and the struggle could even go on in general for months or years. You might be wondering then, what's the purpose of having these deliverance prayers if it takes so long? Well, remember what we said. People are possessed not always because they are very wicked people and have done a lot of sinning, but sometimes people are possessed because it's something that's going to serve to sanctify their soul some more. So God will allow the devil to bother this person for a long time. And all of these exorcisms are victories over the devil. Very good. So then I was telling you about mistakes that must be avoided by the priest. This can be a very consoling apostolate to do exorcisms. That sounds a little bit unusual. You would think that exorcisms would be a frightening apostolate or a exhausting apostolate, but not necessarily consoling. Well, how would it be consoling? The idea is that the priest is bringing a lot of peace to the soul. In that sense, he himself is consoled. The priest must remember that he's totally under the protection of the Catholic Church. He's not speaking for himself. Our Lord Jesus Christ is speaking through him. The holiness of the priest will be increased, and his trust in God will be strengthened. So that's something good that the priest has. Nevertheless, the priest must be careful of a few things. He has to remember that Satan is the prince of lies, and he can never be believed. Therefore, the priest should never engage the devil in conversation if it's going to be about other topics besides the exorcism. The devil sometimes try to dissuade the priest from the exorcism. I think we even do that in our own professional life. Somebody that comes to ask you for a favor, and instead of answering the favor, you sort of change the topic, Yeah, well, that's a good idea. But, remember that, a couple of years ago, we also had a good time doing I don't know what. It's a total evasion of the topic, and then the person doesn't have to commit to fulfilling your favor. Well, the devil does the same thing. Not that we're asking a favor for him. He just tries to change the topic. Apparently, it must be a temptation for some people. Therefore, they have to tell us that it's a mistake that must be avoided. You must never ask the devil about the future. All right. Like when you go to a fortune teller, they can tell you what's going to happen to you in your life in the future, supposedly. Well, you must never ask the devil about this. I mean, I don't know why anyone would be interested to do that. The priest is focusing on removing the devil from the person. And he says, oh, by the way, what's going to happen to me in about five years? You know, am I still going to be living in Singapore? Why would you do that? But I guess they had to write it for some reason. Neither the exorcist nor the possessed person should ever become discouraged. Especially, you know, if these exorcisms get drawn out for weeks, then months, then years. They shouldn't become discouraged. They should be grateful that God, our blessed Lord, is making progress with his soul. This is the principal temptation that the devil uses to stop the exorcism. Discouragement. Discouragement. Actually, that's a big, long anecdote, and I don't remember how it goes. And it's one of these fictional stories to make you remember how powerful it is. But I guess the devil's principal temptation for anyone, not just an exorcism, but anyone all life long, is what they call discouragement. And you might think that his principal attack is something like, you know, pride, anger, lust, envy, these kind of sins, impatience. That's how the devil makes his soul fall into hell. But actually, he likes discouragement because it sort of means no matter what effort you're making to overcome your vices, when you see that apparently you're not having success, you sort of say, well, you know, why bother anymore? I'm not making any progress. I'd rather just sort of forget about the whole fight and go ahead and give in to the vices. That's discouragement. So not only in that, you know, how we sanctify our souls in our own life, but also in the exorcisms or the possessed cases. The devil will tempt the exorcist and the possessed person to become discouraged. Remember that about the possessed person, all the things he had to go through before they actually began exorcism. So the person had to have a pious life. The person had to be receiving the sacraments. The person has to be praying and meditating. And then also the person has to see a psychologist, psychiatrist. And finally, after all those, you know, things being ticked off or checked off, you can start with the exorcism. So this might be a little bit of a, you know, a dream world of mine, but I'm going according to the book here. By the time you begin an exorcism with someone, that possessed person is quite committed to what's going on. I mean, the possessed person really believes in God, believes in our Lord, believes in the power of the priest, is trying his best to live a grace-filled and sacramental life, and then you begin the exorcism. So with all that in mind, neither the priest nor the possessed person should become discouraged, because these are holy people too, but they shouldn't become discouraged. Furthermore, the priest should not be so gullible. I think the word gullible means something like kind of like a victim of tricks. Someone who's easily tricked is gullible. I guess naive is another word for that. Credulous. Furthermore, the priest should not be so gullible as to admit that the deliverance has already happened, when in fact the demons are just hiding until their next attack. So I think I told you last week that the demons, they have 9 choirs of angels also. Just there are 9 choirs going up and closer to God. Just turn that thing upside down, and those that were the closer to God become the closer to the devil now. And then all the other ranks that are lower are just sort of turning over but not falling as low as those highest ranks of angels were. So these lesser angels may leave quicker, but the greater angels stay on longer. All right, so I already told you that charismatics have gotten involved with removing demons from souls, and most of that is fake. And then the conclusion. As our founder of the Society of St. Pius X, Archbishop Lefebvre, told us in regard to exorcisms, he said, read the ritual. Remember I told you it's a book that looks about like this. It has all the blessings and sacraments of the church in it. And it has the exorcisms in it. Read the ritual, which gives precious and wise counsel. Archbishop Lefebvre, like a lot of us, was a man of the church. But I would say even bigger than man of the church, he's a man who speaks the words of the eternal church without any destruction from all the modernism that was going around. That's Archbishop Lefebvre. So when he says something like, read the ritual, what he means to say is, there's so much wisdom, there's so much holiness in that book. It is the result of thousands of years of the mind of the church. So it gives precious and wise counsel. Because of the lack of exorcisms nowadays, there is a surge of requests for help from traditional priests. That's kind of interesting. I'm sure if you were to do some sort of a study or a comparison, the Society of Priests has about 700 priests total, which is huge for us. But compared to the thousands and thousands that are in the world and who have been in the world, it's not that many. All right? Then if you were to take these 700 priests and ask them, have you ever been approached to give an exorcism to someone? I bet you at least half of them would say yes, and probably more. If you did that with the same thing with the Novus Ordo priests, how many of you have been asked to give exorcisms? I'm sure it doesn't get to as high as half of them. There's quite a few reasons for that, and I've told you before. First of all, they don't believe in the devil. All right, they don't believe in sin. They don't believe in grace. They just try to reduce everything to just this natural life here with no supernatural life, and because of that, they don't think there's a devil either. Well, since they're not believing in the devil, I guess they're not going to be called upon to exorcise the devil either. So that's how we end up with more exorcisms in the tradition. First, you must eliminate the cases which are really just medical. Then you must practice a holy sacramental life. Then use the minor exorcism of St. Michael. And finally, only the major exorcism. As I told you last week, in normal times, only certain priests of the diocese have the faculties from the bishop to perform the major exorcism. The priest, while exorcising the devil, must never ask indiscreet questions. Don't ask questions that have nothing to do with removing the devil. The devils are deceitful. They wish to dominate the exorcist. They will suggest good acts at first to him and then finish by dominating his will. If you can take the story of Eve, our first mother, earthly mother, she had an encounter with the devil. And a lot of times we say, well, Eve sinned because she listened to the devil and followed his suggestion to eat the forbidden fruit, which is certainly true. But not just I think. The reality is her sin was already before that. Because that creature was a serpent and was talking, I guess at that time, even though that seems very rare to us and odd that a serpent would be talking, that was not necessarily a fantastical thing for her. But that the serpent was suggesting a subversive behavior against God, that should have immediately tipped off Eve to get out of there or get him out of there, something like that. But she didn't. She didn't flee. I heard he told you that you're not allowed to eat from all the trees of this garden. That's already a deceitful statement, because you can understand that expression in two ways. I heard that he told you're not allowed to eat from all the trees that are in this garden. Let's imagine that the Garden of Paradise had 500 trees. If the devil says that, you would say, oh, he might mean that we're not allowed to eat from any fruit here. Any fruit. You're not allowed to eat from all the trees in the Garden of Paradise. Whereas our Lord, God, had told them, you may eat of all of them except for one. We know that. Eve knew that. As soon as she heard a remark which was being made against God, she should have said, get out, or she should have said, goodbye. But she stuck around and said, she made a clarification. I'm sure it was so tempting. I probably would have done the same thing. She made a clarification. He told us we could eat from all of the trees except for this one. Already then she was drawn into conversation with him. What he said, what the devil said, wasn't necessarily evil. He was just making a remark. But there was some ruse, there was some intrigue in that remark. Because you could understand it in the two ways, that sort of pulled her in. And once she was pulled in like that, she was really giving into pride because she was thinking that she was strong enough on her own to face someone who was opposing God. So it's her pride, And but the devil started with apparently something that was kind of neutral or even good to say. Well, let's say neutral. And that's how she felt. So I suppose if a priest gets into any kind of a dialogue with the devil while doing an exorcism, that is a bad thing. Because the devil's smarter than the priest. And he's going to win. But if the priest stays with the ritual and the prayers of the ritual, our blessed Lord is going to win. So anyway, therefore, the priest must refuse all dialogue. Something I told you last week was we must not exaggerate this apostolate so that the rest of the ministry is neglected. It's true, the devil exists, hell exists, and sometimes the devil is directly possessing a soul. And we have to give some attention to that. But we can't go seeing possessions everywhere and saying, this person needs to be exorcised, and I need to spend so much time on them. I think I told you about that last week, where the Superior General back in the 80s and 90s told us of one priest of our society that was really dedicating himself to this apostolate of exorcising souls, and it turned out that he was really dealing with people with mental illness, and he was, let's say he was just wasting his time is a bit, he was a bit cruel, or a bit categorical. It might be better to say that his time would have been better spent just taking care of normal parish work instead of the big sensational stuff. Along those lines, I can think of another situation when I lived in Guatemala. There had been one of our priests there before me, about, 2 or 3 years before I got there, in 2014. He was we had a priory in kind of a nice neighborhood. I would say even a very nice neighborhood. But a lot of our souls, a lot of our faithful couldn't get to that priory because they just didn't live there, sort of the suburban area of Guatemala. So we also had a downtown church. We live in the priory, we had a smaller chapel there, then we drive a half an hour to 1 hour away from our priory to get to the church. And that was more downtown, and that was a little rougher neighborhood and crime and all the rest of it. Well, I guess we weren't that too far away from a general hospital, just a block or two away. And for some reason, we attracted drug addicts. Besides good Catholic people coming to church, they were drug addicts. And they would sit outside the church and kind of wait for a little bit of attention after Mass or before Mass. And this priest was really into helping them. And that's good, don't refuse your brother. And if you've done it for the least of my brethren, you've done it for me. And our Lord has told us that. And that's great. And so he was giving attention to them, and then a lot of attention. And until, that was his main reason for the visit to the downtown chapel during the week, was to take care of these people sitting outside the church first and last and all the rest of it. And you know what? I know this isn't really on the topic of possession, but we lost that priest eventually. He was convinced that they all come up with a reason sooner or later. He was convinced that we were not really taking care of the souls that God was sending us, but we were just dealing with souls that are special people that come to our special church and in our cozy little family situation. Poor guy. Poor priest. He ended up leaving the society, and I think eventually the priesthood, because he was, messing up his priorities like that. Now, when I got there, and I found people sitting outside the church after Mass, it was no mercy. Get out of here. What are you doing? Well, sometimes. There was a wall that was, not a wall, it was sort of a gate that was constructed before I got there. So a lot of the stuff was impossible. Anyway, so the activity of the exorcisms will help our sanctification and not attract us to sin. If we make sure to take care of this apostolate in its proper proportion. But if we exaggerate it, it's not going to help us with sanctification. On the contrary, it's going to work against the apostolate. These are words of advice that are normally given to the priests. And finally, we should offer this service of exorcism only for the people who regularly attend our chapels or who are genuinely well disposed to do so. So, again, it sounds like that same principle is being carried throughout there, which means don't let this apostolate become the only thing. And if we're going to use this apostolate, we should use it first of all on our faithful, and then there might be some attracted to the tradition also. If they're genuinely attracted to it, we can use it on them also. Moral of the story, we'll be happy to take care of you if you're possessed. And so far I haven't seen any cases in our parish. You can go ahead and let me know after Mass if I'm wrong on that. After Mass, after this conference. All right, there it is. That was 4 or 5 conferences about angels and demons. It was a good topic. Father Summers particularly wanted me to talk about it because last month, October is the month of the angels, the good angels, and at the same time it was good to understand what the evil angels might be doing to souls. To take them away from their love of God. I'm just looking for a piece of paper I might have missed. Okay. So if you can remember, back in about the month of August, before I went on vacation, before I started covering angels and demons, we were talking about St. Maximilian Kolbe and the MI, the Militia Immacolate, which he founded in 1917, and the miraculous medals. So you'd heard about some of Father Maximilian's victories in Poland and the founding of the City of the Immaculate, and how they sort of migrated from Krakow to Grodno to, I can't remember the place they finally ended up in Poland, to have the City of the Immaculate. And then that order of the Franciscans became the largest Franciscan order in the world, the Knights of the Immaculata. That became the largest branch of the Franciscan order. And that's saying a lot because there's many, many Franciscans in the world. I mean, there have always been many, many Franciscans. And that's supposed to be a joke, There's like 3 things about the Pope that he doesn't know. The first thing the Pope doesn't know is how many different congregations of Franciscans are there. That's how many there are. Not even the Pope knows how many there are. I can't remember the 2 other things the Pope doesn't know about. But there we are. That's the first one. Well, these are like these missionaries. They're a little bit bigger than life. They're not quite like the rest of us. I would say Father Stellan from 2 weeks ago, he's a little bit bigger than life. And also, they just cannot refuse any kind of missionary situation. I've lived with a priest like that myself for a few years. And so what I'm going to tell you about Father Maximilian now fits perfectly with these kind of people that I'm describing. And Father Maximilian was like this too. So if you can picture, we're in about the year 1930. I think Europe feels that the next war should be somewhere around the corner. But there was Father Maximilian traveling in a train in Poland, and he happened to be sitting in a train car across the benches that you think used to face each other inside the train cars. And there were a couple of Japanese men sitting on the other side of the bench, facing him. They were Japanese students in the university someplace in Poland. So he struck up a conversation with them, which is already more than I would do. And then he, when they said goodbye to each other, he gave them miraculous medals. And they replied by giving him something small, as a small token also, some small wooden elephants, some kind of charms. And from then on, he resolved to help these godless people. Uh, you know, just the fact that he gave them the miraculous medals, that's more than I would do. Maybe I'm wrong. Then they replied by giving him some sort of, things that belong to their culture. But he right away assumed, well, those are idols and that's pagan and we got to convert these people. He's way beyond me. I would have said thank you, left the thing on my dresser as a little bit of a trinket, a little bit of a memento, I don't know what, and that's as far as it would go. But no, these are pagan people. I gave them miraculous medals. I got to go convert their pagan land. They're bigger than life, these missionaries. And he's right. He's right. So he's got it in his mind, just from that one encounter, that one exchange, I've got to go to Japan. I've got to go convert those godless people because they're handing out wooden elephants. All right. So what's the next thing he did? He went to see his provincial and his district superior for permission to go to Japan. Now imagine if you were the district superior. You got this Father Maximilian working now for you for the last 10 years. He's got a reputation for doing extreme things. But no matter what, whatever he does that's extreme, he always lands on his feet like a cat, He always lands. He doesn't lose the bank, break the bank. He doesn't lose all their work. In fact, he keeps advancing and advancing. And it's obvious that he's doing the work of the Mother of God, and she's blessing it. So he asked the district superior if he can go to Japan and start the next City of the Immaculate. The provincial was just completely taken aback by that and said, what do you know about Japan? Do you know the language? Do you have any friends over there? Do you have any money? And the answer was no, and no, and no. So the next question would be then, why are you thinking of going to Japan? So that's kind of how the provincial finished with him the first time. He told Father Maximilian, no, Poland needs you. You're the only one that can run this City of the Immaculate, which you founded. Of course, St. Maximilian would say that Our Lady founded it, but you're the only one who could run this thing. You're the one who founded it. Why are you thinking of leaving? Well, would you believe that eventually the provincial broke down on what he was saying, and he thought that it was a normal expansion of this kind of work to let Father Maximilian go to Japan. 1930, tense years. I think when the stock market crashed in the United States in 1929, that spread a international unrest around the world. And a few nations, as we know, reacted by becoming nationalists, saying we don't need international stock values to keep our country going. We're just going to become more and more of our own nation. So, well, Japan was on the list of nationalist nations. And despite that, Father Maximilian left on February the 16th, 1930, with 4 very zealous Franciscan brothers to start the apostolate over there. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. Father Maximilian, by that time his brother, who was a priest, named Father Alphonse, was living at the quarters of the City of the Immaculate in Poland. And Father Maximilian and these 4 zealous priests, zealous brothers, they left in the middle of the night. So all Father Alphonse did was go over to his own brother, give him a blessing, sort of whisper in his ear, we're working for the Immaculate, continue the hard work. And he left. And he didn't say goodbye to his mother either. He would eventually write her and say, I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. And neither of these two, Father Alphonse or his mother, would he ever see again in this life. The reason he did that was, he said, the Immaculate must not be kept waiting. Bigger than life. I would never think of doing that. But he's a missionary, and that's the way they are. So, before, on the way to Japan, they had to leave in Poland, I guess. They went down to Rome, the Eternal City, to get the blessing of the Pope, and also to get the blessing of the Seraphic General. So the General Superior of the Franciscans is called the Seraphic General, and they have a house in Rome. So he went to Rome to receive his blessing. After receiving the blessing, Father Maximilian sort of pulled out all of his money or whatever worldly possessions that he had and put that before the Superior General and said, I'm a Franciscan, this is our rule, to have no earthly possessions even when we travel. The Superior General said, well, yes, but this is an exception. You have no context whatsoever if you're going to go to the Far East. So I guess Father Maximilian took the things back only at that moment. Before he left the next day, he made sure to leave all these worldly possessions on a chair in the room that he was staying in. St. Maximilian always insisted on poverty. He had a principle. If St. Francis were to come back today, St. Francis should feel at home, meaning he doesn't want to find riches around. And you probably know that even during the life of St. Francis, he had assigned his superiors and his council and all the rest of it. They themselves rejected St. Francis because of being so separated from the world and so dedicated to poverty and everything. They disowned their own founder while he was still living, St. Francis. I think he's from the 1100s. I lose the date of St. Francis in my mind a lot of times. He's definitely from the Middle Ages. Even then, Middle Ages, within the lifetime of the founder, they were mistreating the founder. And that didn't affect St. Francis. He continued with his life of poverty, and the Franciscan order flourished eventually because of that. So, hundreds of years have happened since St. Francis. We're now talking about the 20th century, and St. Maximilian says we should live in a way that should not surprise St. Francis if he were to come back. So, the next day, he and the 4 religious brothers left Rome for the Orient only with their tickets and $50 between the 5 of them. They set sail for the Orient, not knowing exactly where they would settle. So I guess he left for Japan, but there was enough talk in the meantime to make him say, well, maybe we'll just see whatever works for us in the Orient. Well, the Orient, as you know, that's where we are right now. It's huge. So we'll see what happens. He stopped in Shanghai. All right, so they had to stop in Shanghai. He would have loved to have established a city of the Immaculate in Shanghai of China. And they even had an acceptance by the local bishop there, which is a good sign. But they had jurisdictional problems. I think what that means is they were never given the zoning for building a whole huge establishment like the city of the Immaculata. They could build a church, they could build a friary, but nothing as big as Father Maximilian was used to having. Therefore, they went on to Japan. They first went to Tokyo. The bishop there was very accepting of them. He said, however, same thing like Shanghai, we don't have the space for you to build what you need. You must go to another city that is Nagasaki. And there's another bishop over there, which is maybe even better for you because he speaks Japanese. Now that might sound odd to you. The bishop in Tokyo says, go to Nagasaki because the bishop over there speaks Japanese. I think the bishop in Tokyo must have been a missionary bishop, so he was still speaking the European languages, and he wasn't really a local yet. But the bishop in Nagasaki really was a local, and he was able to speak Japanese and probably Latin. And so there would be communication between, Father Maximilian and his helpers, and also the bishop of Nagasaki. And then he could help them with translations to get the message out to the people. Well, what happened there? The bishop of Nagasaki received them well also. That's very good. And he also arranged for them to have some land, which is great. 20 minutes walk outside of the city of Nagasaki. That was a great offer, but there was a condition attached to it. The bishop said, Father Maximilian, I know that in your seminary you obtained a doctorate in philosophy and in theology, so you're quite intelligent. Therefore, I ask you as payment back to be the professor at our seminary. So that was, let's say this, Father Maximilian accepted right away. That was a great exchange for him. a great trade. But it eventually did become difficult for him to be working between City of the Immaculate and also a professor. So if you might recall, they left Poland on February the 16th. By May the 25th, so that's only 3 months later, they're already in Japan, and they already sent out their first issue of The Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T. You might remember that was the publication that St. Maximilian started, the Militia Immaculate started. So only 3 months after leaving Europe, they already put out their first publication, which maybe doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but it's a big deal because these men don't speak Japanese. And they had to get everything translated. There was also some more exchanging going on there. From the seminary, they sent a good student who knew European languages to help them translate what they were saying into Japanese and then also make the Japanese characters to write it all out. That was going well, and then some difficulty started up. Because whenever you start something that belongs to our Blessed Mother, you got to go through some trials first. So they lost their translator, and then they found some others. I think they were pagans. There was a Buddhist man that came to them. He was translating for them. And then also, I can't remember someone else, maybe from one of the other Christian religions, came a Methodist. He was doing the translating for them also. So Father Maximilian's all about, how does it go? As long as they're working for the kingdom of God, we are not going to kick these people out. So he was quite grateful for their help. Selling subscriptions was difficult because apparently in the culture of Japan, it's considered, there's a word for that, indiscreet, inconsiderate, that kind of thing, to just use a mailing list and send out subscriptions to the world at large. If you want someone to buy your magazine, it can only be done by a face-to-face encounter, and then they can be put on your list. If you're just sending the things out through a mailing list, maybe back in those days you would have been, charged with some sort of, offense against the government by doing that. So that was difficult. So they were given this friary by the Bishop of Nagasaki, and there was a problem, at least for Father Maximilian. They were in a pagan land. On let's see, how'd they go? Their friary was on a hillside, and there was a valley, and then there was another hillside going up the other direction. Well, on that other hillside, facing straight towards them, was a large niche with a statue of Buddha in it. And this annoyed Father Maximilian to all ends, some word like that, to end all, to all lengths. He was very annoyed by it. So one night they got over there and they destroyed the Buddha. No, that's not how it happened. That would be too cruel. And if this is on YouTube, it might get us in trouble for me talking like that. They bought the hillside. Whatever benefactors they had, or whatever way they appealed to our Blessed Mother, they were able to raise enough money to buy the hillside opposite them. And then, after they own the hillside with the Buddha on it, they're able to remove that statue from the niche and put a statue of the Immaculate inside the niche. And that was much better to look at. It reminds me, again, when I lived in Guatemala, not far from our house in the suburban area, there was what's called a mega church. I think we have some of those here in Singapore, where it's more like a stadium. And then the people come there by the thousands, and they have deck parking, that goes up 5 or 6 levels of parking lot just next to a shopping mall. And they have, concerts in there and television in there and all kinds of things. Anyway, there was one of those. We had to pass by it all the time when we took our trip to go to our downtown church. Well, that was everything in Guatemala is peaks and valleys. That's how the land is there, and cliffs and that sort of thing. So this thing was sitting on the edge of a cliff, really, this mega church. And the highway went down next to it right through a valley. And then there was another cliff going up the other side. Well, somebody on the other side had lots of houses up there with fences so that people didn't fall off the cliff. There was someone over there that set up a beautiful shrine to our Blessed Mother, not facing their house, inside the cliff area, but facing outwards of the cliff area, across the highway, and right towards the megachurch. The Blessed Mother was there to proclaim her rule of this world over the Protestant sects. They got together in the megachurch. So that was a thought that came to me when I said about how Father Maximilian bought the hillside next to them. In the space of 4 years, from 1930 to 1934, they had 25 vocations in a seminary which they themselves had started. So remember, there's the seminary in Nagasaki, downtown, but these people are these, the Knights of the Immaculata, are 20 minutes walk outside of downtown, and they have their own seminary. They started their own seminary, and there were 25 vocations. So for me, that sounds like pretty good odds. You're in a pagan land, you've been there for 4 years, so you have a seminary, and you have 25 people studying there. Those are good numbers as far as I'm concerned. But then again, I'm not saying Maximilian Kolbe. He thought that was way too few, and something had to be done about it. I'm not sure if anything was done about it in the immediate time, but they were always working on that. As far as lodging is concerned, Niepokolanow, the City of the Immaculate, in Poland, had started with just about like houses with no roofs and houses with no heat and all the rest of it. It was very similar in Japan. Snow was still falling inside the building when they would go to sleep. But they were happy to make these sacrifices for the conversion of the people around them. Father Maximilian left Nagasaki in 1936. So 6 years after the foundation, and they kept doing very, very well over there. I can't remember if it was because of his health or because he was just called back to Poland to keep things going over there. I think it's the second. And those men in Nagasaki continued to work very well with the City of the Immaculate. And then finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. Every time we say the word Nagasaki, the only thing I can think of is an atomic bomb dropped by the Americans. This city was bombed in the year 1945. And probably a lot of you know this already because the photograph is famous. They called their institution the Garden of the Immaculate instead of the City of the Immaculate. The Garden of the Immaculate was not even touched by the atomic bomb. All around them was destruction. Let's see, again, the famous hillside. They had just enough of a hillside behind them to protect them from the atomic blast. Now, that doesn't even sound like reality to me. Hillsides do not protect you from an atomic bomb. Hillsides get obliterated by atomic bombs, and even if you are on the other side of the hillside, you get knocked out by atomic waste and fallout. So yeah, this is not just a hillside that saved them. This is the Blessed Mother that saved them. So it was the wartime, and they had to cancel, let's say, suspend the making of the publication because they didn't have paper. They couldn't use their factory because the press, because the national people have to use the machines of the religious order to do their work, and these kind of things happen. So they were suspended from doing their work probably for a couple or 3 years. But this is interesting. The war was over, and already within 1 year, I think by December of that year, they sent out 15,000 copies of the Night. Again, they got back up and running very quickly. And just for your information, before the war, 1940 or maybe 1939, in Japan, they were up to 70,000 people receiving the Night. So the KNIGST, that's the periodical. So this is great work. And just like Father Stellan was telling us a couple weeks ago, maybe it's been 3 weeks ago, I can't remember. It's our Blessed Mother's work. Everything you read about in the book True Devotion to Mary, then you make your consecration, and then make it something real in your own life. What I'm reading here or telling you about with Father Maximilian and his helpers, it's all just bringing to life those principles that we're supposed to do, which is the Immaculate Heart of Mary has to conquer this world again. How is she going to conquer this world again? She's going to conquer it through me or through us, because in my own soul, I'm going to give up my selfishness like she does. She has no selfishness, but she gives herself completely to the will of God. And we do the same thing in her. So the great work that Our Lady did in the Incarnation just continues and continues and continues in all of our souls in this apostolate of sharing the miraculous medal, giving the faith to souls, and then following up on it to make sure they keep the faith. So that's Father Maximilian, and we'll continue with him next time. See, today is the 25th of the month, so I think we have a first Friday next Friday. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll have another conference. We'll say our prayer now. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou